rock it, drop the bass. Now the heads.
It may not seem like it, but the times that we live in have a lot in common with a huge swathe of time, from the beginning of the Renaissance to the end of the Enlightenment. Society was in a state of near constant upheaval due to revolutions in information technology, in communication. The rise of literacy and the printing press, translations of the Bible, removed the need for someone to intercede between God and man to translate the word of God, and so the Catholic Church lost its grip on power as Protestantism rose and lay preachers began. Heresies became so profligate that the Catholic Church could no longer prevent them. This led to all kinds of other issues. They even had their own problem with fake news, because people had been taught for so long to venerate the written word, because the Bible was the only book, the only writing that many of them ever encountered, that if something was down in print, it had this degree of authority that almost nothing else had. This problem ran clear into the 17th century. Political pamphlets and chapbooks helped spark off the English Civil War. So the more things change, in many ways, the more they stay the same. And communications technology, literacy, writing, the removal of barriers, definitely facilitates this constant revolution in communication. Well, it's still going on today. It was into the ground well prepared by the popularization of the Bible, by its translation, by the emergence of the printing press, by the removal of these intercessory people between you and God, the removal of authority. It was into this that the Rosicrucians emerged. Now, they appear on balance to be a hoax that was made up, but what they claim to be doing, coming forth, this secret society, to share the secrets of Hermetic magic, of alchemy, of the Kabbalah, of a mystical type of Christianity, a heresy, and even of the emerging ideas of natural philosophy, by coming forward and claiming to be this secret society, willing to share, they played into that tradition. Now, they don't seem to have been real, though they've ended up in a lot of esoteric ideas and conspiracy theories and things over the years, but the discussions of people claiming to be Rosicrucians or talking about the Rosicrucians certainly did, in their pamphlets, coin the term the Invisible College. Now, with historical retrospect, we tend to use the Invisible College as a kind of catch-all term for the various societies, circles of friends, salons, coffee houses, and so on that laid the groundwork for the academia of the future as something separate from the clerical in many ways. So it's more of a description of that. I mean, you can think of the Invisible College almost like the internet. The cafes and salons were chat rooms. The emerging postal system was the lines of communication, the email of its day. And this too was a way in which people could meet and discuss in semi-secret, challenge orthodoxies, discuss, and this is how knowledge began to disseminate itself within countries, across countries. This too was revolutionary. And again, the rise of literacy, the questioning of orthodoxies, all allowed this to emerge and come forward. And all of this questioning of authority, the undermining of the old order, at least in terms of British history, came to a head in England with the brilliant idea of decapitating a king. Of course, we then lurched into a religious dictatorship, and the intellectuals moved back underground in no small extent, and they did their questioning in the dark. But then there was the Reformation, and this new king took great pains not to stir things up in the way that his predecessor had, and even moved to formalise the Invisible College, to bring the more reputable and brilliant elements of it together in the Royal Society, which has basically determined modern academia since the Enlightenment, has laid down the rules, the ideas, the institutions that we all understand and know about, hopefully. Universities, peer review, journals, all of these things emerge out of that earlier culture, the Invisible College, and then the Royal Society, which was a formalisation and institutionalisation of everything that had gone before. Despite the formalisation of the Royal Society, the rebellious ideas, the anti-authoritarianism, the direct communication that had been established in the couple of centuries beforehand continued through the Republic of Letters. This is even more analogous to the internet of today. Yet people could communicate directly and without necessarily getting interference from government and so on, because where the authority of the church had declined, the authority and the politics and the concerns of the crown and the government continued. But thanks to the Republic of Letters, people communicated scientific and social ideas across boundaries. So you had people in revolutionary France and English radicals communicating with other English radicals in what would become America. And through into after America had had its revolution, this communication continued. Benjamin Franklin in particular is an important figure in the Republic of Letters, and the idea that these communications and these ideas would continue, and many of them were implemented or attempted to be implemented in the United States. It's wise, I think, to remember that these were English radicals who thought they could get away with creating something different in America out from under the watchful authoritarian eye of crown and government. Right up into the modern era, during the Cold War, scientific communication, journals, papers and so forth allowed scientists on either side of the Iron Curtain to continue to communicate with each other. And the dense and hard to understand language of science, of academia, often meant that things could be communicated across this barrier that the apparatchiks who on either side scanned over these documents for treason or sensitive information would often miss things. And so it was that the scientists were able to communicate and to try and foster a spirit of cooperation, which probably contributed towards glasnost and the various ways in which the US and the USSR cooperated. That in its own way was a continuation of this anti-authoritarian communicative spirit that has been part of academia, or of science, of these back-channel modes of communication forever. You can look at the internet itself, rather than being analogous, as being another direct outgrowth of this. I mean, even in its earliest form it was fairly anarchic, but it came out of academia, at least as we understand it now. It started in the military, moved to academia, and it is there through email and eventually web markup language. It was in the scientific community, the academic community, that it really took off as a means for people to directly and quickly communicate and disseminate ideas. I mean, can you imagine if the internet had existed during the Enlightenment or during the Renaissance, these periods that were already revolutionary because of communications technology, postal service, literacy, the printing press and so on. How much more rapid would those already rapid advances in knowledge and understanding have been if communication had been near instantaneous? We would be well ahead of where we are now, and in many ways the internet has built the rapid technological progress and social progress, not always for the best, but It's been there because of that, because of communication, allowing people to work and think together to disseminate and test and examine and argue ideas. All of which culminates as background to a single point that I want to make. The intellectual dark web is part of this long tradition of anti-authoritarian, heterodox, that means in opposition to orthodoxy. It all culminates in that. There's this long, powerful tradition of refusing orthodoxy, of challenging orthodoxy, of pushing against people who would presume to be an authority over you in academia, in science. The intellectual dark web is just an extension of that, and sure, it contains people who you and I probably don't agree with on very much. Jordan Peterson, I disagree with about 95% of anything that he says. There are people like Douglas Murray who are part of it, who I also find very little I can agree with. But there's also other people whose politics and so on I do agree with, but more importantly, they are challenging orthodoxy. They are having the discussion. It's about having the discussion. It's about examining these ideas and not just settling on accepting you can't discuss that because I said so as a reason not to. They're not willing to toss the whole scientific method and process out. They're willing to have the discussions, whether it be online, in small circles of friendship groups, panels that they hold. This is all part of this long, rich tradition. It's not something sinister. There may be people in there with bad ideas, but the best way to tackle those bad ideas is to examine and discuss, to test, to peer review, and to undermine them if they're bad. And if even ideas that we don't like turn out to be true, there is value in knowing that they're true, and then we can proceed to perhaps do something about them. Once we know the truth of the matter, all right action must be preceded by knowing what is true. You have to deal with the world as it is, not as you feel it ought to be. So there is nothing sinister about the intellectual dark web. It's just academia and science rooting around the damage that the current orthodoxy is doing, and in its own way the current orthodoxy is really no different to those Catholic priests interceding between man and God in those old days, and things were vastly improved when that got rooted around. In this case it's knowledge, not God. It's truth, not God. But the principle is still the same. We have to be able and willing to examine controversial and difficult ideas, and this is nothing new. Zang.
Ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big bang. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find a Spider-Man.